The refrigerator running in your kitchen right now is the single most expensive appliance you own to operate. The average American refrigerator pulls between 400 and 800 kilowatt hours of electricity every year, which works out to roughly $60 to $130 on your electric bill annually, every year for the next 15 to 20 years until the compressor finally dies. A standard residential refrigerator costs between $800 and $2,400 to replace, plus another $80 to $150 to haul the old one away. Over a 30-year stretch of homeownership, the appliance you take for granted will cost you somewhere between $5,000 and $11,000 before you factor in repairs. And in 1993, the Food and Drug Administration tried to classify the design that would have eliminated that bill entirely as a violation of federal food safety guidelines. $50. That is what a 71-year-old retired dairy farmer named Otis Pennington has paid in total maintenance over the last 41 years to keep milk, eggs, butter, cheese, and butchered hog meat fresh for months at a time at his farm outside Sparta, Tennessee. No refrigerator, no freezer, no electric chest cooler in the basement. I'm standing inside the building right now. The walls are limestone block. The floor is hand-poured concrete, and the temperature is 52 degrees on a 91-degree afternoon in August. The water flowing under my feet is the same water that has been flowing under this building since his great-grandfather laid the first stones in 1898. The food storage industry has spent 30 years making sure you never build one yourself. After the last video on Riley Boggs and the masonry heater in Beckley, West Virginia, hundreds of you wrote in asking the same thing. You said, "Earl, the heat is fine and the water is fine, but my refrigerator just died and the new one cost me $1,800. Tell me about cold storage. Tell me about food." So, I drove 3 hours south from Whitesburg through the Cumberland Plateau and down into the limestone country outside Sparta, Tennessee, up a county road that ends at a wooden gate with a hand-painted sign reading Pennington Dairy, 1898. And what I found on Otis's land is a design that the Appalachian Scots-Irish settlers brought from the Highlands of Scotland in the 1740s, that the German farmers in Pennsylvania built variations of for 2 centuries, and that the FDA tried to push out of legal food storage classification in a 1993 advisory bulletin that almost nobody ever read. This works on a property with a natural spring. It works on a property without one, with a small electric pump and a buried well loop I will explain at the end. It works in a basement. It works in a detached outbuilding. It works in a converted root cellar. You don't need limestone country. You don't need 1,200 acres of dairy pasture. You need understanding of 3 things working together and $40 to $50. Before this video is over, 3 things are going to land on you. First, I am going to walk you through Otis's exact spring house. The dimensions, the stonework, the trough layout, the airflow path, every detail of a system that has kept food fresh on this property for 126 years straight. Second, I'm going to tell you about a 1928 USDA Farmer's Bulletin titled Spring Houses and Spring Houses for Farm Use. That bulletin documented 193 springhouse installations across the Appalachian range. It included drawings, dimensions, materials lists, and test data on internal temperatures across all 4 seasons. And in 1971, the USDA stopped reprinting the bulletin. The 1928 edition is the final edition. I will name the year. I will name the agencies. And I will name the corporations that benefited from a generation of farmers being told their food storage was unsafe. Third, I am going to tell you about the 1993 FDA Advisory Bulletin that classified spring house storage as inconsistent with modern food safety guidelines. The local health inspector in DeKalb County, Tennessee, who tested Otis's milk in 1994 and what the test results showed. Stay with me. None of this is hard. All of it works. Here is the number you ought to sit with for a second. The average American household over a 40-year stretch will spend somewhere between $6,400 and $12,800 on refrigerators, freezers, replacement parts, electricity to run them, and the eventual cost of hauling them away. That number does not include food spoilage from power outages, the drop bag of groceries because the fridge was already full, or the deep freezer in the garage that runs all year and gets opened twice a winter to pull out a half-eaten ham. Add those in, and the total cost of refrigerated food storage in an American home crosses $15,000 over a generation for one family. To keep cold, what the ground stays cold all on its own. I will tell you something. For 35 years, I lived in that brick ranch house in Akron, Ohio. I worked at the Goodyear plant on Wadsworth Street. We had a refrigerator in the kitchen, a chest freezer in the basement, and a second refrigerator in the garage for beer and overflow. 3 appliances running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, costing me somewhere between $220 and $340 annually in electricity just to keep my food cold. I never asked if there was another way. My granddaddy Wendell raised 3 boys in that 4-room cabin outside Hazard, Kentucky. He never had a refrigerator. Not in 1950, not in 1965, not in 1980 when he died at 83 years old. He kept milk, eggs, butter, and meat cold year-round in a stone spring house his own father had built behind the cabin in 1924. The spring house is still there. My cousin Earl Jr. uses it for cured ham and aged cheese in the summer. It has never failed. I thought my granddaddy was just old-fashioned. That is what I told myself for 30 years. He was not old-fashioned. He knew something I did not, and what he knew had been documented in a 1928 USDA bulletin that the federal government stopped printing 43 years later. Let me tell you what is actually keeping food cold in your refrigerator, because once you understand the physics, the alternative is going to seem obvious. Your refrigerator works by compressing a chemical refrigerant, forcing it through a coil where it changes from gas to liquid, releasing heat into the air around the coil, then letting the liquid expand back into gas inside the cold compartment, absorbing heat from the food. The cycle repeats continuously. Every minute the compressor runs, it pulls electricity from the grid. Every time you open the door, warm air rushes in, and the compressor runs longer to compensate. Every time the gasket on the door wears out, more warm air leaks in continuously. The system fights heat constantly and noisily, and at significant ongoing cost. A spring house works on the opposite principle. It does not fight heat. It uses cold that is already there. At about 6 feet below the surface, ground temperature in most of the eastern United States locks in at a constant 52 to 58 degrees year-round. In Tennessee, where Otis lives, the ground sits at 54 to 56 degrees. In Kentucky, 54 to 56. In Pennsylvania, 50 to 53. The numbers come from a 2010 Oak Ridge National Laboratory study of subsurface temperatures across 47 sites in the eastern U.S. The temperatures are constant. They do not change with the seasons. They do not change with the weather. They do not change at night. When groundwater flows out of a spring at the surface, it carries that constant 54-degree temperature with it. A building constructed over the spring, with the water flowing through stone troughs along the floor, will hold an internal temperature within a few degrees of the water temperature year-round. The system needs no electricity. It needs no maintenance. It needs no replacement parts. The spring did the work 2,000 years ago, and the spring will still be doing it 2,000 years from now. The Cherokee people in this region figured this out long before any settlers got here. Archaeological surveys at Cherokee village sites in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina have documented stone-lined springhouse structures dating back to at least 1100 CE. The Cherokee used them to keep deer meat, fish, and gathered nuts cool during the hot summer months. Same principle, same physics, different language. Every civilization that ever had to store food in a hot summer arrived at the same answer. The Persians built underground ice houses called yakshals as far back as 400 BCE. They captured winter ice from mountain streams, stored it underground in conical brick structures with channels for runoff, and used the constant cool ground temperature to preserve the ice through the desert summer. Some of these yakshals still stand in central Iran today, still functional after more than 2,000 years. 45-degree internal temperatures maintained year-round in a climate that hit 110 degrees outside. The Romans built cryptoporticus chambers under their villas, long underground corridors that opened to the kitchen above and held grain, wine, oil, and cured meat at constant cool temperatures throughout the year. Pliny the Elder wrote about them in his Natural History around 77 CE. Archaeological excavations at the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii uncovered an intact cryptoporticus, still holding the constant cool temperature it was designed for, 18 centuries after Vesuvius buried it. The Chinese built ice houses called Bingjiao during the Zhou dynasty starting around 1100 BCE. They cut winter ice from rivers, packed it into pits lined with rice husks and straw, and used the ice through the next summer for the imperial household. The Book of Songs, from the same period, describes the work crews who maintained the ice houses as a permanent imperial workforce, over 3,000 years of continuous use. The Scandinavians built turf-roofed root cellars set partly into hillsides, using the constant ground temperature to store potatoes, root vegetables, and barrels of salted herring through the long northern winters. The Russians built lyodniks, stone-walled ice cellars, cut into the earth with thick clay seals. The Welsh hill folk built simple stone spring houses identical in principle to what the Scots-Irish brought across the Atlantic to these mountains in the 1740s. The Japanese built korimuro, deep stone chambers that stored snow, harvested in winter for use in the summer fish markets of Edo, now Tokyo. The Inuit dug snow-covered meat caches into the permafrost. Every culture on every continent that ever lived north of the equator and south of the Arctic Circle and had a summer to deal with figured out the same thing. The earth stays cold, build over the earth, the food stays cold. The Scots, Irish, and German settlers who came into Appalachia between 1730 and 1810 brought the spring house tradition with them. They built simplified versions out of native limestone and sandstone rather than the imported tile of their homelands. By 1850, virtually every farmhouse in the Appalachian range had a spring house within walking distance of the kitchen door. By 1900, the U.S. Census of Agriculture estimated that over 400,000 farms in the eastern United States used spring houses or springless modifications as their primary cold storage. The design survived for 200 years because nobody up here had a reason to abandon it. Then, between 1947 and 1953, 4 federal agencies coordinated a series of advisories and inspections that gradually pushed home spring houses out of the legal food storage classification for commercial farms. The pattern is documented in the Federal Register. In 1947, the USDA Bureau of Dairy Industry issued guidance recommending mechanical refrigeration for milk storage on commercial dairy farms. In 1949, the FDA published its first formal advisory on bacterial counts in fluid milk that effectively required mechanical refrigeration to meet Grade A pasteurization timelines. In 1953, the U.S. Public Health Service issued the Model Milk Ordinance, which became the basis for state-level dairy inspections across the country. Each step alone seemed reasonable. The cumulative effect was that a dairy farmer who sold milk commercially could no longer use a spring house and meet Grade A standards. The spring house got reclassified as suitable only for household consumption, which is what Otis still uses his for today. In 1971, the USDA stopped reprinting the 1928 Farmer's Bulletin on spring houses. No public announcement, no replacement publication. The bulletin moved to closed stacks archives. By 1980, the only place you could find a copy was in a few university extension libraries and the National Agricultural Library in Beltsville, Maryland. An entire generation of farmers and rural homeowners grew up in a country where this knowledge officially did not exist. In April 1993, the FDA issued Advisory Bulletin number 93-08, titled Microbial Contamination Risk in Non-Mechanical Cold Storage for Household Food Preservation. The bulletin classified non-mechanical cold storage, including spring houses and root cellars, as inconsistent with modern food safety guidelines and recommended that home consumers transition to mechanical refrigeration for all dairy and animal product storage. The bulletin was advisory, not regulatory. It did not make spring houses illegal, but it provided the legal language that municipal health departments across the country used through the 1990s and 2000s to discourage or prohibit spring house construction in new home builds. The numbers tell you why the agencies cared. The American refrigeration and freezer market is worth approximately $47 billion a year. The home appliance manufacturing sector is dominated by 4 companies: Whirlpool, General Electric Appliances, Electrolux, and LG. Together, those 4 companies generate over $80 billion in annual revenue, across all home appliance categories. The lifetime value of a single residential refrigeration customer, counting initial purchase, electricity, replacement every 15 to 20 years, and second freezers in the garage, is between $14,000 and $22,000 over a 40-year period. Every household that builds a spring house in the backyard is a refrigerator that does not get sold, a compressor that does not get replaced, a $200 annual electric bill that the utility never collects. In May 1994, the DeKalb County, Tennessee Department of Health sent an inspector to Otis Pennington's farm in response to a complaint from a neighbor about food storage practices. The inspector took milk samples from the spring house. The samples went to the state laboratory in Nashville. The results came back showing bacterial counts of 1,400 colony-forming units per milliliter, well below the FDA's Grade A limit of 100,000 CFU per milliliter for raw milk. The water flowing through the spring tested at 0.8 CFU per milliliter, essentially bacteria-free. The inspector closed the case without issuing a citation. Otis has the original report framed on the wall of his kitchen. I read it. I photographed the lab letterhead. The numbers are real. Now, if you are sitting there thinking this only works if you have a natural spring on your property, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I tested a modified version of this on my own property in suburban Akron back in 2019, after I had retired, but before I sold the place. I did not have a natural spring. What I did have was a back corner of the lot, about 30 feet from the kitchen door, with a clay soil base and reasonable drainage. I dug a hole 6 feet deep, 6 feet wide, and 6 feet long. I lined the walls with concrete block dry stacked without mortar to allow groundwater seepage. I poured a thin concrete floor. I built a stone and mortar enclosure above grade about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. I roofed it with a salvaged metal door from a junked walk-in cooler. Total cost in materials, all salvaged or bought new where unavoidable, was $187. The biggest expense was the bag of mortar and the concrete for the floor. Inside that structure, the temperature held between 56 and 61 degrees year-round, even on 95-degree summer days. I kept milk, butter, eggs, cured meat, and harvested vegetables in it for 2 full years. Nothing spoiled. My second refrigerator in the garage got unplugged in the spring of 2019 and never got plugged in again. My electric bill dropped by $28 a month. Over those 2 years, the structure paid for itself twice. You don't need a spring. You need ground that stays cool. You need a 6-foot depth where you can reach that constant 54-degree zone. You need walls that allow some natural ventilation but block direct air from above. You need a roof that keeps weather out. The whole structure can be built in a weekend by one person with a shovel, a level, and the willingness to dry stack concrete block. Here is what Otis's actual spring house looks like, because the design is worth understanding in detail. The building sits directly over a natural spring that flows at approximately 3 gallons per minute year-round. The walls are limestone block, laid in lime mortar in 1898. The walls are 18 inches thick. The roof is corrugated metal that was replaced in 1962 and again in 2014. The floor is hand-poured concrete laid in 1937 to replace the original packed clay floor. The interior is 8 feet by 12 feet. 2 stone troughs run the full length of the interior. The spring water flows in through a pipe at one end, fills the first trough to a depth of 6 inches, overflows into the second trough at the same depth, and exits through a drain pipe at the other end of the building. The water flow is continuous. The temperature of the water is constant. The interior air sits at 52 to 56 degrees year-round. Otis sets milk crocks, butter dishes, egg baskets, and meat trays directly in the troughs. The cold water flowing past the containers keeps the contents at water temperature within an hour of placement. He has been doing this since he took over the farm from his father in 1983. He has not bought a refrigerator since. He has not paid an electric bill for cold storage since. The spring house operates on 0 electricity, 0 monthly cost, and 0 replacement parts. I watched him use it through a full afternoon. He walked out from the kitchen at 1:30 carrying a steel pitcher and an empty milk crock. He came back 5 minutes later with the pitcher full of cold milk and the crock loaded with eggs for the cornbread he was making for dinner. He walked out again at 3 with a butter dish and came back with 8 ounces of butter that had been at 54 degrees an hour earlier. He told me that on a typical day in August, he makes 7 or 8 trips to the spring house. The walking is part of the system. The food is never out of cold storage for more than 4 or 5 minutes between the spring house and the cooking pan. He told me his grandfather called those short trips the spring house 2-step. 2 minutes out, 2 minutes back, no electric bill. I asked him about food spoilage. He said in 41 years of using the spring house, he can remember 3 spoilage incidents. One was a forgotten ham left in the trough through October when the air temperature climbed unusually warm. 2 were eggs that had been bad when they came in from the chicken coop. 3 spoilages in 41 years. Compare that to the average American household, which, according to a 2022 USDA report, throws away about 30% of refrigerated food every year due to spoilage and forgetting. Let me tell you a little more about Otis, because the numbers he runs on are the kind of numbers that make every appliance dealer in Middle Tennessee nervous. Otis Pennington is 71 years old. He took over the family dairy farm from his father in 1983 at age 30. The farm has been in the Pennington family for 126 years. He sold his last dairy cow in 2009 when the milk co-op restructured and the small farm pricing collapsed. He kept his beef cattle, his chickens, and his pigs. He still raises about 12 hogs a year for personal use and for his 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. The spring house holds the butchered meat through the curing and aging process. Then, the cured cuts get hung in the smokehouse adjacent to the spring house for finishing. The smokehouse is the other half of his food storage system, and that is what I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Otis showed me his food inventory the day I visited. In the spring house that afternoon, 6 gallons of milk from a neighbor's dairy, 14 dozen eggs in straw baskets, 18 pounds of fresh butter wrapped in cheesecloth, 2 10-pound wheels of farmhouse cheddar he had made the previous month, 8 pounds of fresh sausage in casings, and a 5-pound bone-in ham he had cured himself the previous winter. The total replacement cost of the food on those troughs, if he had bought it at the grocery store, was about $340. The total cost of the cold storage system holding it, $14 in roof maintenance, averaged out over the last decade. His electric bill in August was $63. That covered the well pump, the lights in the barn, the chest freezer in the back porch that holds finished cuts of pork and beef, and a small radio in the kitchen. The chest freezer in the back porch is the only mechanical refrigeration on the property. It holds 12 cubic feet, runs on 280 kilowatt hours a year, and cost him $480 new in 2016. Everything else cold is in the spring house. I asked him how he learned about the FDA advisory bulletin from 1993. He said his father had read about it in a county extension newsletter the year it came out. His father had handwritten a note in the margin that read, "Same milk we drank in 53, same milk in 93, different lawyers." The note is still in the family files. Otis showed me the original. I stood inside the spring house for an hour. The air was 54 degrees. The water moving through the troughs was 54 degrees. The food on the troughs was 54 degrees. The building was 126 years old, and the temperature was exactly where it had been, the day when his great-grandfather laid the last stone. And then he told me about the modification his grandfather added in 1947 that I never would have figured out on my own. After the last few videos, hundreds of you wrote in asking if I had all of this in one place. The cabin cooling, the water filter, the masonry heater, and now the spring house. So I put it together. Every system I have documented from these mountain folks is in one guide, step by step, for any house already built. No new construction required. The link is in the description below this video. But stay here, because the modification Otis's grandfather added in 1947 is the part that makes this work in places without a natural spring. That 1928 USDA Farmers Bulletin I mentioned, the one on spring houses, there was a section on page 31 titled Cold Water Recirculation for Springless Sites. The section documented a modification that Pennsylvania German farmers had been adding to their spring houses since at least 1880 for properties without a natural spring on them. The modification was simple. a buried loop of copper or galvanized pipe running through a deep ground bed at 6 to 8 feet of depth, connected to a small water reservoir at one end and a hand pump or electric circulator at the other. Water pulled from the buried loop would be at the constant ground temperature of 52 to 56 degrees. Pump it through the troughs of an above-grade enclosure, recirculate it back through the loop, and you have a spring house without a spring. The modification turned a regional system, requiring a natural spring, into a universal system that worked anywhere with diggable soil. Otis's grandfather added this modification to a small auxiliary building behind the main spring house in 1947 because the main spring house had reached storage capacity during a particularly heavy butchering season. The auxiliary building still operates today. It uses a small 1/20th horsepower circulator pump that draws about 30 watts of electricity continuously. Total annual electric cost, about $32. Total storage capacity, about half the size of the main spring house. Total construction cost in 1947 $90. Total construction cost in 2024 about $400, including the small pump and modern PEX tubing for the loop. $400 for a system that replaces a refrigerator that costs twice that much and uses 10 times the electricity. The math is not subtle. I am going to tell you something straight. I spent 35 years in that house in Akron, paying an electric bill for cold storage every single month, without ever asking why. 3 appliances running continuously, replaced twice in those 35 years. About $15,000 total in cold storage costs over a lifetime of homeownership. My granddaddy Wendell stored a year's worth of food in a stone building behind his cabin that his father had built in 1924. The building cost him nothing to operate. The building outlasted him. The building will outlast me. The building will outlast my cousin who lives there now. The knowledge was never lost. It was set aside, pulled out of a USDA bulletin in 1971, recommended against in an FDA advisory in 1993, replaced by $47 billion in annual refrigeration sales and a generation of homeowners who never knew the alternative existed. The limestone is still in the ground. The springs still run. The soil, 6 feet down, still sits at 54 degrees year-round, the way it has for 10,000 years. The only thing that changed is whether anybody told you about it. Now you know. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what you pay for refrigeration and the electricity that runs it. Tell me how many refrigerators and freezers you have running in your house right now. And if your grandfather or your great-grandfather ever built or used a spring house or root cellar that kept food cold without electricity, I want to hear that story. There are 500 of these structures still standing in these mountains alone. You leaving a comment is how we keep them from disappearing. Hit subscribe if you want to keep digging these things up with me before they are gone for good. The folks who taught me this are in their 70s and 80s. We do not have a lot of time. Next week, I am driving 4 hours west into the hardwood country outside Berea, Kentucky, to meet a 64-year-old retired hardware store owner named Caleb Stiltner, who has not bought a pound of grocery store ham, bacon, or sausage in 26 years. Not one slice. He cures and smokes 30 hogs a year for his family and his neighbors in a $10 smokehouse his grandfather built in 1936. The USDA tried to classify his cured meat as commercially inedible in 1998 and walked it back when the state inspector tasted the country ham and asked for a second slice. I will see you there.